Today we will be covering UFC on ESPN 34, with the main event being Overeem versus Sakai. So this is, I believe, the third week in a row of a UFC on ESPN fight card, and we're only a couple weeks away from getting into some of the bigger fights of the year. But before we get into the card today, we'll start with how it went last week. We went 4-1 on our picks. On the main card, it was all the favorites won. And actually, it was kind of weird because I believe the first 5 fights of the night on the prelims all were submissions, if I remember correctly. And then I think the last 6 on the card were all decisions. So kind of a boring main card last week, seeing some pretty dominating decisions, not very competitive in some of the fights, especially Neil Magny versus Robbie Lawler, and then obviously the main event with Rakic over Lionheart Smith. But yeah, we did hit on our one underdog play with Zach Cummings, and also our only loss on the day was another underdog in Bill Algeo versus Ricardo Lamas. It was probably 1-1 going into the third round, but Lamas did 10-8 Algeo in the third, so that was our one loss. But overall, 4-1's not bad. We'll take that, and hopefully keep it going today. So we'll start off with the first pick. This was originally on the undercard, and I was still going to take it as one of my undercard picks. But with a cancellation in a fight, women's fight that had, I think it was 3 different fighters become replaced, and eventually ended up just getting moved to next week. So this did jump onto the main card, I believe. And it is Jalin Turner versus Thiago Moises. And Turner's 9-5. He's coming in as an underdog at plus 135, while Thiago's 13-4 at a minus 145 favorite. So one thing I will say here is that the size advantage is huge for Jalin Turner. He's 6'3", fighting at lightweight, which is absolutely huge for the division. He also has a 77-inch reach. And on the other side, Moises is only 5'9" and only has a 70-inch reach. So Turner's got, 6 inches on him, and along with a 7-inch reach. So definitely a size advantage for Turner. How much that comes into play, we will see. But Turner is 2-2 in the UFC, but he has been fighting pretty bad competition. I shouldn't say bad, but mediocre. But he did fight in his debut Vicente Luque at welterweight, got knocked out, ended up coming back down to lightweight. So other than Luque, he hasn't really fought anyone good, which obviously means he hasn't beaten anyone that special either. And I know the 9-5 record doesn't look too good, but like I said, he is huge for the division, which, depending on who you fight, will make a big difference. And on the other side, Thiago is also 2-2 in the UFC. He's fought some better competition. He actually is coming off a win over Michael Johnson. He's also fought Beneil Dariush, who's one of the toughest people to fight in the division. So his resume is a little bit more impressive, and he also has a much better ground game. He has 6 wins by submission. Turner has 1. But one thing to note is that Turner has never been submitted before. And on the other side, Turner is really a knockout artist. 8 of his wins are by knockout, 8 of the 9, I believe. And all but 1 have come in the first round, which is interesting. His most recent fight was a second-round finish, but Moises has never been finished. So these are 2 guys that don't really get finished too often, and are guys that both like to finish their fights. So Thiago's resume is probably more impressive, and like I said, he has the ground game that will help him steal a round or 2. But he's never fought a guy that's even 6 foot tall, nonetheless 6'3". So I really think that the size might play a big part here. It's harder to wrestle bigger, longer guys, and obviously, if Turner wants to keep this fight in striking range, he has the size to take advantage of the boxing. So I'm going to take a flyer on the high-powered finisher as a plus 135 dog. I like the size. I like the power. And honestly, I kind of like the style, even though I don't really go against wrestlers too often. But Thiago has shown that he is willing to stand and trade So I will take Jalin Turner as an underdog at plus 135 to open up the main card. And next up on the card is Brian Kelleher versus Kevin Natividad, I think. My apologies if I just butchered that. Natividad, I believe, is how it's actually pronounced. But nonetheless, Kelleher is making his fourth appearance in the octagon and this year alone in 2020. He is coming off of a loss to Cody Stamann, but I don't hold that against him too much, as Stamann is one of the best in the division, in my opinion. But Kelleher's career has pretty much been he's really good, but he's not incredible. He's definitely a tough fighter, but he's not like one of the best, if that makes sense. He's very well-rounded, and he's been around for a while. He's 34 years old and fighting in the UFC for a long time. But you don't really know what you're going to get out of him. But regardless, most of his fights are pretty competitive if he's not winning them. But Natividad is making his UFC debut after 5 straight wins. My thing with him is obviously I think the talent is there. He's a young fighter, maybe has a future in the UFC, but the experience isn't. He hasn't really fought anyone notable. And when you look at what Kelleher's done, I don't know if this is a good UFC debut matchup for him. So Kelleher is a pretty sizable favorite here, and I think it kind of makes sense. He's the veteran. He has the experience. He also has ground game experience, and I really do just like him to win the fight. But one thing about Kelleher is some fights he wants to stand and throw, and he does all right. Other times he looks to take you down and wrestle you, and he does all right there too. So I honestly have no idea how this fight would end. I would assume probably either knockout or decision. But I just think this is a tough matchup for someone that's making their UFC debut. And I'll take Kelleher at minus 230, even though, to be honest, I probably don't think he should be that big of a favorite considering his inconsistencies. But he's been good in recent memory anyway. And I'll take him to beat Natividad. And coming up next is probably the fight that I am most excited for. Anyone that knows Michel Pereira knows why, but he is 23-11, which is a ton of professional fights considering his age. I think he's only 26 years old. But he's going up against Jalin Turner, who has had some out of the octagon issues just in the face-offs for this fight. He slapped Pereira in the face for seemingly no reason. I mean, they were wearing masks. I don't know if Pereira was saying something to him, but slapped him in the face, had to get held back. Also, in one of Imadaev's recent fight against Max Griffin, Max Griffin tells a story that Imadaev and him were staying at the same hotel. They were just getting breakfast, and Griffin was with his family, and Imadaev came up and started trying to fight him right there in the hotel. Police got involved in the issue. I don't think it was anything serious, but it's just a guy that tends to cause issues outside pre the fight. But regardless of all that, I think Pereira is obviously going to be motivated a little extra after getting slapped in the face-offs. But the thing here is that Pereira is probably the wildest, most crazy fighter in the UFC and probably all of MMA in general. He has done stuff that I've never seen out of anyone else before. He relies on flying knees, which aren't uncommon, but Superman punches off the cage, Showtime kicks. He'll just sprint around, chase people, back them down, and usually try to throw a flying knee once he has them against the cage. But he's done moonsaults off the cage in the middle of fights. The clips of him with an opponent on the ground guarding, and he just turns around, does a backflip, and lands on him. He's almost stepping on people's faces. It's a crazy guy. I would definitely advise, if you've never seen him fight, just Google this guy's name and go to videos and just see some of the wild stuff he's done. It's insane, and it obviously makes for a very entertaining fight. But with that, with his crazy antics and cartwheels, and I mean, he's literally done like a back handspring in the middle of a fight before. But so obviously he has shown that he can gas out. In one of his most recent fights against Tristan Connolly, he did all this crazy stuff in the first round. That's actually probably where you'll see most of his crazy stuff if you look up his highlights in that Tristan Connolly fight. But gassed out in the first round, got dominated in the next two, ended up losing that fight. But his most recent fight is Diego Sanchez, in which he was dominating the fight. Don't get me wrong. but ended up getting DQ'd for an illegal knee. And maybe you can contest it that Diego sold it a little bit as the ref went up to him and basically told him, if you just say you can't fight, you're going to win. And that's ended up saying I can't see. So take that however you want to. But regardless of all the antics in the ring, he actually does have a lot of power with him. He throws a lot of kicks. He can knock people out with kicks. He has a lot of power in the hands. He has incredible physique. He's very in shape looking, but obviously with everything he does, like I said, he can gas out. But definitely an exciting fighter. You know you're going to get something crazy happening when he is in the octagon. But on the other side, Imadeev, he's coming off 2 losses, most recently to Danny Roberts, who was also Pereira's last win. And obviously in UFC or any combat sport, styles make fights, so you can't just say, just because Pereira beat Danny Roberts and Danny Roberts beat Imadeev, that Pereira is going to beat Imadeev. But there's also a lot of stuff that does point to Pereira here. I'm not going to go too much crazy into it. I mean, the odds are even. You can see -115 for Pereira, and Imadeev's coming back on -105. So they have him as pretty much a pick 'em fight. I do think Pereira is the better fighter. I think that he beats himself a lot with everything that he does inside the octagon that doesn't really involve fighting, and basically, but I'll take him at -115. And once again, I highly recommend that anyone goes and watches this dude's highlight tape because he really is one of a kind. You're not going to see many people like him in the UFC. But yeah, Pereira -115 is my pick for that. I think he'll knock him out. He'll land a flying knee or one of just his crazy kicks or punches or whatever he does, and I think he'll finish the fight. And that leads us into the co-main. This was actually supposed to happen a couple weeks ago. I gave the whole breakdown of it in a show. I think it was 2 weeks ago. But it's Alonzo Menifield, who is 9-1, and his odds are -140. First, OSP, Ovince Saint Preux, who's 24-14, and come back as a slight underdog at +110. So I did break down this entire fight on one of my shows a couple weeks ago, so I'll do kind of an abbreviated version of it. I still think that OSP will probably be the most popular underdog on the card just because of the name. He's been around forever. He is a little bit older. His recent track record shows he's not what he used to be, which is a long-time light heavyweight contender. Fought for belts and came to fame because of his submission skills, specifically the Von Flue choke, which he has 4 of them, and I think there's only been 5 of them in history, so people jokingly call it the Von Preux choke. But honestly, I would give him the title, even though he didn't invent it. He's the best at it. It's a weird choke where it looks like OSP would be getting guillotined, and he uses his shoulder to actually choke out the other guy from the top, which it's an interesting choke. It's very cool to watch. Sometimes you don't even know what's happening until the other guy passes out. But yeah, so like I said, he's just not who he used to be. His most recent fight, he moved up to heavyweight and lost a split decision to Ben Rothwell, but I honestly think it was a pretty clear loss. He didn't really do anything. And if you're looking for OSP to win this fight on the ground, you would think you'd be able to take down and wrestle Ben Rothwell, who has very limited wrestling skills, but he didn't do that. Like I said, he didn't do really anything. But Menifield is a knockout artist. I believe he has 8 knockouts, and he started off 9-0 before losing his last fight by decision to Devin Clark, who is probably a slightly above average fighter, maybe bottom of the rankings, but not a real true contender. But Menifield's looking to become a contender in his own. Obviously, beating a guy like OSP, regardless of the state that he's in, could give you a boost into the rankings and get some better competition. But I just think there's a lot of bait here. It's a bet on OSP as a slight underdog. But if you watch his fights, he's not what he used to be. He's really not that good anymore. And so I'll take the younger, more powerful Menifield here to win this fight. I would assume by knockout, but definitely could go to a decision considering OSP has been reluctant to throw in the past. So Menifield at -140 is my play. You can look into some knockout odds, knockout props. You can probably get it around even, maybe a little bit better. I would look into that a little bit if you're looking for some extra value. But that leads us into the main event, and it's Alistar Overeem, who is an absolute legend in UFC, and he's going up against Augusto Sakai, who is a relative newcomer to the heavyweight division. Excuse me. Overeem's been around forever and has fought pretty much everybody. He's been fighting professionally since 1999, believe it or not. He's beaten Vitor Belfort twice, Mark Hunt, Verdum twice, Brock Lesnar, Frank Mir, Roy Nelson, JDS, Andrei Arlovsky. You can name it. He's a former Strikeforce champion, and he's on a pretty good run right now, to be honest, even though he is 40 years old. Since the start of 2016, he's beaten Arlovsky, Hunt, Verdum, Alexei Oleinik very recently, and then most recently Walt Harris, who is a knockout artist in his own right. And his only losses are in the past 4 years, which is Stipe, Francis Ngannou, Curtis Blades, and Jairzinho Rozenstruik, who I think are pretty much widely considered the top four in the heavyweight division right now. So he hasn't really lost to anyone bad in the last handful of years. But even in the Jairzinho Rozenstruik fight, he was dominating the fight. And then with 4 seconds left, he got caught and knocked out, which is obviously a tough way to go. I don't know if you've seen the pictures of his lip all cut up. But yeah, he was dominating that fight. He was about to win that one too. But yeah, his only losses are to the 4 best fighters in the division. And I mean, you could honestly make the argument that he is that 5th best. But I know more than anyone tends to fade older fighters. I just don't think they have the power, the chin that they've had in the past. But Overeem's last 3 wins are by knockout, so I don't think he's lost his power. But yeah, enough about Overeem for right now. We'll get into Augusto Sakai. He's coming off of 6 straight wins, most recently Andrei Arlovsky, Marcin Tybura, and Blagoy Ivanov. And I will say a lot of people think that he lost the Andrei Arlovsky fight, but nonetheless, he got the decision. But yeah, I mean, you listen to who I listed off for Overeem and who he's beaten and who he's fought in. And then you take a look at Sakai, and the resume just doesn't match up. Tybura is a good fighter, but he's pretty mid. Ivanov, the same story. He's kind of a wrestling heavyweight, but not really. And then Arlovsky in 2019 isn't too great of a win either, even though, like I said, a lot of people think he lost. But I really do like Overeem here, and I think minus 155 is a good value for him. He's been around forever. He has seen literally everything that there is to see at the heavyweight division. As you see, 64 professional fights is almost unheard of, especially in a sport like this. But he has a clear advantage on the ground. Overeem's ground and pound is kind of legendary. And he also has 17 submissions, so he can finish the fight with jiu-jitsu as well. And obviously, we know his knockout power is still there and has always been there. So I really do think that Overeem dominates the fight. Like I said, he's seen everything, and I don't think Sakai has something that's going to overwhelm him or even catch him off guard. And another reason why is Sakai's never gone 5 rounds before. He's never even been in a fight that would go 5 rounds. And Overeem went 5 rounds less than a year ago and looked good until, like I said, the last 4 seconds when he got caught by Rozenstruik. So I really think that the odds should be more skewed in Overeem's favor. I think there's a lot more pathways to a victory here from Overeem than there is for Sakai. I think Sakai's going to have to fight a perfect fight to beat Overeem because Overeem doesn't throw away fights, don't get me wrong. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how else to say it other than I think Overeem's a great pick at 155 or at minus 155. And so I hate taking pretty much a chalk main card. I know I did take Jalin Turner in the first pick, but I mean, it's the fight sport. You usually think one guy's better, and more times than not, the favorite does win. So I'll run it back real quick before signing off here. We're going with Jalin Turner in the first fight. That's the underdog pick of the day, plus 135. Brian Kelleher, minus 230. Michel Pereira, minus 115 in the fight that I'm most excited for. And hoping to see something crazy out of him, maybe a viral knockout. Alonzo Menifield at -140 over OSP, and Alistar Overeem at -155 in the main event. I also, if anyone's interested, I do think that Overeem will finish the fight. I don't think it'll go to a decision. I think both guys will kind of go in there and maybe be hesitant for a round, but should get pretty right into it. I mean, they are heavyweights, and obviously the finish rate's pretty high in that division. So those are the picks for today. For the fight card tomorrow. Tomorrow was a pretty stacked day overall in the world of sports. You got UFC, Kentucky Derby, NHL playoffs. I believe it's Game 7. You got NBA playoffs. You got college football, full MLB slate. You got it all. So there's a ton of things to bet on tomorrow. But if you're looking for something maybe a little different, depending on who you are, UFC, this would be a good. This would be a good card if you're not a UFC fan to get into the sport. You're going to see some interesting fights. I don't really see a boring fight on the card. Maybe Menifield and OSP, depending on how it plays out. But I think it should be a pretty exciting card. You're going to see a lot of different weight classes and a lot of guys with different skill sets. So, yeah, good. Should be a good card to watch. So thank you guys for tuning in. As always, I will be back next week for another UFC preview, but I will be back throughout the week, Monday through Thursday, doing underdog picks for MLB and NBA. So thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you guys again next week.